Hello everyone, I'm excited to announce the starting of a new series, Calculus. We're going to start off with a bit of review, just like with the Algebra 2 and Pre-Calculus series. But unlike that series, we're going to just go surface level. I'll just let you know the topics and I won't actually go in depth into actually explaining them because that's what my other pre-calculus and algebra 2 videos are for, and even before that as well. But it's more of just like I'll say polynomials. These are what polynomials are, and then um, I'm assuming you would know pre-calculus if you're watching this, which is why I would just review that. So without further ado, let's start with today's lesson. It's about review of basics. So basically, I mean linear equations, inequalities, polynomials, and rational expressions. So what is an equation? An equation is when you set two things equal to each other. So a linear equation would be something like 2x plus 3 is equal to negative 5x minus 11. So that's a basic linear equation. And how we would solve this is we would move all the variables to one side, all the constants to another side, and then just isolate the variable. That's basically how you solve any equation. Now I won't go too in depth in this, like I just said, but that's sort of the process. You isolate the variable, and the other side is basically your solution. Inequalities, on the other hand, replace this equal sign with one of four symbols: greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. One of these four replaces it, and it follows the same rules as equations. You can add, subtract, and multiply by any number. You can divide by any other number except 0. But there's one extra rule for inequalities, and that's when you multiply or divide by a negative number to both sides, you're going to have to switch the sign. If it was originally greater than, it would switch to less than, and vice versa. Similarly, if it was originally greater than or equal to, it would switch to less than or equal to, and vice versa. That's how you solve basic linear equations and inequalities. Moving on to actual big polynomials. A polynomial is basically something in the form of an x to the power of n plus, and I won't write everything out, so I'm just going to go on to a1 times x plus a0. Now this looks very, very complicated, but basically it's saying that a polynomial is the sum of a bunch of terms. Each term has x to the power of some number, and in this case, the degree of the polynomial is the maximum power that it has, and in this case, the degree is n. The leading term is this term right here, and the constant is this right here. Each of the a's, basically a sub 0, a sub 1, all the way to a sub n, are called coefficients of the polynomial. And we'll get to graphing polynomials in the next lesson when we actually talk about functions. So one main type of polynomial is called the quadratic. And the quadratic has a degree of 2. An example would be something like negative x squared plus 3x minus 2. And factoring polynomials is a big part of pre-calculus, but it's very complicated for a short review lesson, which is why I won't go into it. But factoring quadratics is especially important. And you can basically take out the negative. I'll just show you this one example. And then you can factor it to get x minus 2 times x minus 1. And with practice, you'll just be able to look at a quadratic and factor it, or you can use something called the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula is actually pretty important, so I'll go through that in this lesson. The quadratic formula is a way to solve quadratic equations. We talked about linear equations, which just have a degree of 1, but quadratic equations use something called the quadratic formula, where x has two solutions. And the two solutions are indicated by a plus or minus. You use plus for one solution and minus for the other solution. So enough with that. The actual formula says x is equal to negative b. Here's where the plus or minus comes in. And then plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And some people remember it as sort of like a rhyme that they think in their head, or some people just memorize the formula. Or some people might even want to derive it, but it's kind of long to derive it, especially if you're on a test and it's timed. But anyway, now all you see are a bunch of letters, so you might be confused about where all the a, b, and c came from. It's just coming from the formula ax squared plus bx plus c. This is the general quadratic equation. And if you want to solve this problem, ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, you would use this quadratic formula. So that's quadratics. You can use quadratics a lot, especially in pre-calculus when you're modeling things like flights, vertical flights of objects. And when I say flights, I don't mean like plane flights. I mean like if you throw a rock and its projected flight is a parabola or a quadratic function. And after that, all we need to know about for this lesson are rational expressions. A rational expression is the ratio of two polynomials, or basically the division of two polynomials. You have a polynomial p of x, and we'll get into this notation in the next lesson, function notation. So it'll basically be p of x over q of x. And we want to find out what this is. So an example would be something like 2x cubed minus 7x plus 1 over x minus 3. This is an example of a rational expression. And one thing you can do with rational expressions is you can simplify it down into an actual polynomial plus some remainder over whatever this denominator is. In this case, it's x minus 3. And you would use polynomial division to do so. But polynomial division is generally a long process, which is why I won't cover it in this video. But polynomial division is pretty important in pre-calculus. You won't really use it much in calculus except when you're trying to find roots of a polynomial. Other than that, you most likely won't need to use polynomial division. But when you actually do need to find roots of a polynomial function, and you obviously do in calculus because it's all about describing functions. That's one of the applications of calculus. You would definitely need to use polynomial division and also graphing polynomials and all that. Okay, that was our review of basics for calculus. In our next video, we're going to be talking about functions like I've mentioned a few times already. And after that, we'll be talking about trigonometric functions and then exponential and logarithmic functions. And then we'd be done with our review. We'll go straight into limits. So I'll see you in our next video.